Hello and welcome to God's One True channel. Now, just to be clear, I am not making the claim that I am God's One True channel. However, this is God's One True channel on YouTube, right? That's literally the channel name. That's what it's called. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reviewing some of the claims made by the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses who claim to be literally God's One True channel. And we're going to see how that stacks up, because whilst I am not making that positive claim that that is what this is, they are making that claim. And this channel is God's One True channel, at least in the YouTube sense. So it is at least really God's One True channel in one specific way, right? That is one more way than would be true of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses and their convoluted 1919 teaching. So I think we'll call that 1-0. All right, let's get into it. We're going to start with a talk that David Splane gave. This is an old one. It's called Put Up a Hard Fight for the Faith. And I took a snippet from it for the last video that I did. And in the course of that, I found something particularly relevant to this current month's broadcast, which I wanted to tie together. But whilst we're at it, we're going to pick this talk apart because this one is a sneaky talk.
They were sneaky.
See, I told you. All right, let's see how sneaky they were.
So first, let's talk about apostasy. And we'll call it spiritual poison.
Now, David Splane actually offers no justification, no scriptural basis, nor any parallel for doing so. He doesn't say there's a particular reason why we can call this spiritual poison. He just says we're going to call it spiritual poison. And that is really crucial to every other point that he makes here. Without labeling apostasy as spiritual poison, without inventing that from whole cloth, then he would not be able to make the arguments that he's going to make from Scripture alone.
Now think about poison. What's the best way to avoid being poisoned? Well, we have to recognize poison when we see it and then avoid it. And the same principle applies to teachings that could destroy our faith. And that's not always easy. Now, not many of our brothers and sisters would deliberately get involved with apostates, but it could happen without our realizing it. You know, we receive letters at times from brothers and sisters who are troubled by something they saw on a web page, an accusation, a rumor about the society or about the organization. And the problem is, they had no idea that apostates were behind it.
Ah, there they are, those sneaky apostates at it again. This is interesting because, without fail, once the conversation became uncomfortable with anybody that I had brought up any issues with within the congregation, they would begin to question the source of the information. They're trained to do this. Have you been listening to apostates? This is an apostate idea, which is just obfuscation from the fact that they can't actually address the issue. It's like, this is complicated. I don't like this. This makes me feel uncomfortable. Did you hear this from somebody else? Is there a reason that I can justify ignoring the actual problem by labeling where it came from?
It's tricky.
Aye, it is tricky.
Because the apostates don't advertise, you are now on an apostate webpage.
Well, actually, they often do advertise pretty much exactly that. I mean, avoidjw.org is not a subtle URL. JW Facts, every witness is going to know that that's not the official website of Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of YouTube channels have words like apostate or XJW in the title. So, yeah, they kind of do that.
They often pose as sincere witnesses who just have questions or concerns. And some who aren't really apostates can cause just as much trouble as the apostates do by their negative talk and criticism.
Yeah, this ties in with what I was just saying. As soon as you start asking uncomfortable questions, all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe you're not an apostate, but maybe you're apostate adjacent. Maybe you've been influenced by apostates. These seem like apostate ideas, which essentially just means anything that I can't explain in my current belief system or worldview. So it's very tricky because it makes it really hard for individual witnesses within the congregation to be able to have any kind of discourse or dialogue, because they know that as soon as they start asking difficult questions, the culture of the congregation is such that they will be branded as spiritually dangerous, spiritual poison.
Brothers, we need to be on the alert. This is serious. Suppose that, out of curiosity, you get into a discussion forum with individuals who claim to be Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, maybe they are, and maybe they aren't. You don't know. You've never met them. And someone starts asking questions. What did you think of last month's broadcast? Did you really find it encouraging? Or do you think the brothers who write Watchtower articles are living in the real world? I wonder if they realize just how hard it is out here.
The governing body and anyone in Bethel who writes Watchtower articles is removed from the real world. And that's not just a lazy attack, it's just a reality. I've visited very poor places. I've seen that, but I don't understand the reality of what living in those conditions day to day, or just knowing that as your entire existence for your whole life would do to a person, what that life would be, and how hard that actually is. I can't claim to have that understanding of it. So when they live completely isolated from the world, in a cult compound, surrounded by people who think the same way as them and respect them on pretty much every topic, then it stands to reason that they are not going to understand the pressures of working a real job for a real company with real mixtures of opinions and viewpoints, having to pay off a mortgage, having to raise children, having to just deal with all of the many normal everyday problems that people who are not living in Bethel deal with. That's not to say that living in Bethel is easy. I certainly don't envy them, but they are in a different world. I think it's a much worse world to be in. I don't think it's a healthy place to be, but they are disconnected from the real world. So the point that he's raising here is a legitimate objection, and there's no way that you could actually argue that they are in touch. The best argument, even from a witness perspective, that you could make is that they are kept in touch by the other brothers who go out in the field. The circuit overseers report back to them and tell them about what's going on in the field and what's happening on the individual family level in the congregation, etc., etc. Or that you could make the argument that they know what's going on because Jesus is really the leader of the congregation. He's the head of the congregation and he's guiding them. But you can't make the argument that they directly understand what your day-to-day life and existence is like when they live permanently sheltered away from society in Bethel.
And then a few others join in with their own negative comments. Now, you don't know whether these individuals are apostates or just brothers and sisters who are in serious spiritual trouble. But does it matter?
Well, there's a bit of fuel for the fire of soft shunning. Does it even matter whether you are an apostate or not? It doesn't matter as long as the impact of whatever it is that you're saying has a negative impact on my feelings.
How does it make you feel? When you leave the forum, do you feel upbuilt? Determined to expand your ministry? More convinced than ever that Jehovah has an organization that you love and that you're delighted to be a part of. You feel honored to be a part of that organization. Or does the experience leave you sad, uneasy, uncomfortable?
So much of being a Jehovah's Witness revolves around accepting the conclusion without verifying, checking, or understanding the premise. So the premise here is completely laid. You have the true religion. Your beliefs are correct. And everything in your sphere should encourage you all the more so to double down on those beliefs, to be more active in the congregation. It is the job of any information that you may come across to build your faith up, to reaffirm what you already believe to be true. You're actively seeking out confirmation bias because nothing less will do. You must have things that are affirming your beliefs constantly because they cannot stand up to real scrutiny. And so the premise here is that everything must make you feel better in order for it to be good for you. But that's just not true of the human experience.
Now, someone might say, I need to get involved in that forum so I can help those people. They shouldn't be together. Even if they aren't apostates, they're not good for one another. Staying in that forum to help someone is like holding his hand while he drinks poison and then having some yourself so he doesn't have to drink alone.
You see why that poison analogy was so important? Why that had to be crammed in here? There is nothing in Scripture to support this, but it's crucial to this argument, because when you take that away, when you realize that this comparison, this one-to-one comparison between drinking poison and hearing opposing ideas or consuming information does not stack up, then what you're left with is a fragile belief system that cannot stand up to scrutiny and scrutiny. So we can't have that, so we have to label it as poison and tell you to keep right away. Thank you very much.
We need to follow the advice recorded at Romans chapter 16 and verse 17. Now think of this imaginary forum that we just described in the light of Romans chapter 16 and verse 17. Now remember, there's all kinds of negative talk flying around in this forum. You don't know who's behind it. And here's what it says in Romans 16 verse 17. Now I urge you, brothers, to keep your eye on those who create divisions and causes for stumbling, contrary to the teaching that you have learned, and avoid them. Now think about that forum. Does it create divisions? Yes. Is it a cause for stumbling? Could be. Is it contrary to what we have learned? Do we even have to answer that question? Now, whether it's intended or not, the effect will be to weaken our faith. So what do? What does Paul tell us to do here at the end of verse 17? He says, avoid them.
All right, that sounds like a very sound scriptural basis for the point that he's trying to make, doesn't it? But if we look a bit closer at that verse, it begins with, now I urge you, brothers, to keep your eye on those who create divisions and causes for stumbling, etc. So you have to identify these ones. At the end of that verse, there are 4 cross-references, and I'd like to actually read 3 of them. Matthew 7:15, be on the watch for false prophets who come to you in sheep's covering, but inside they are ravenous wolves. False prophets. 1914, 1918, 1925, 1975, before the end of the 20th century, before this generation. Those are just some of the false prophecies from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society regarding the end of this system of things and Armageddon. Next verse, Titus 3:10. As for a man who promotes a sect, reject him, after a first and a second admonition. So firstly, in this verse, it talks about someone who's promoting a sect. Definitionally, regardless of what Jehovah's Witnesses like to say on their FAQ page, definitionally, they are a sect. Their roots can be traced to Adventism, so they are a sect. And then secondly, it mentions after a first and second admonition. So this would mean that the person is being engaged with about their ideas, about the divisions that they're causing, about the doctrinal issues, etc., etc. They are not just being completely viewed straight off the bat as dangerous spiritual poison and not to be talked to at all. They are allowed a period of time and some engagement in order to determine whether or not they can remain a part of the congregation or whether they need to be avoided. And the third scripture, 2 John 10, I was going to say the verse, but it's just verses in 2 John. 2 John 10. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your homes or say a greeting to him. Now, this teaching in the context of 2 John is specifically referring to not the teaching of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses at any given moment, because that varies hugely between 1912 and 1934 and 1972 and 2014 and 2025. It's not their teaching. It is specifically the teaching that Jesus rose from the dead, that he was resurrected. It's that teaching. So taking that verse in its context, using the marginal references per the New World Translation, we can see that this is not a one-to-one comparison with labeling something as spiritual poison and completely avoiding a person, not engaging with their arguments, not hearing what they have to say, just completely cutting off contact with them. That is not at all what that scripture says.
Now, I'd like to say a kind word to some who may be involved in discussion forums. You may like to use this medium to blow off steam, so to speak. Maybe there are little things in the congregation that are happening that you wonder about, or decisions the elders have made that you wonder about, and so you get involved in the forum and you blow off steam, and after that you feel better. But what about others in the forum? How do they feel? Wouldn't you feel awful if negative comments you made were responsible for someone leaving the truth? I know you wouldn't want that to happen. So please, please, be careful about what you say. Now, another person might say, well, I can see where those warnings about apostates apply to so-and-so. He's weak, but don't worry about me. I'm spiritually strong. I can handle it. That's like a weightlifter, thinking that he can drink a vial of poison and it won't hurt him because he's so big and strong.
No, that would be like somebody who has a firm conviction in their beliefs and feels that their beliefs can stand up to scrutiny and can hold up to discussion in an open forum. The really sad part about this, and this is not an isolated thing, this is a pattern of behavior, is that the governing body, the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses, essentially punish Jehovah's Witnesses for or condemn them for believing too much of what they say. So when a prediction doesn't come to pass, such as 1975, they then gaslight the members and essentially say, oh, well, some people got carried away. Some people thought this. Some people being the leadership, it was not a grassroots idea that just sprung up out of nowhere. This was fed to them from the channel that they believed was God's one true channel, when we all know this is God's one true channel, at least per YouTube. So when people actually believe those things and then they do not come to pass, the leadership, rather than apologizing, which they never do, rather than that, they gaslight the members and essentially blame them for being so foolish as to have believed them in the first place. And the result of that is that they believe them even more. It's this weird psychological trap. Anyway, in this particular instance, what they're saying is the things that we're teaching you, don't take them to a public internet forum because they won't play well there. It's not going to hold up. You are not well equipped enough to deal with that.
We are not so strong, so spiritual, so intelligent that we can't be affected by the poison of apostate ideas.
No, you're just wrong. That's the problem. You're wrong. It's unfortunate, but it's true.
Now, when might we feel pressured to read something that the apostates have written? Consider this scenario. The unbelieving husband of your Bible student sends his wife a link to an apostate web page and says, here, you better look at this and see what you're getting into. Well, your student is concerned, and she wants you to take a look and tell her what you think. Well, that's not an option. Paul says, avoid them. That doesn't mean reading apostate literature or searching social media to see what they're saying about us. So what do you say to your student? You might say something like this. I can imagine that this is very upsetting for you, and you certainly do need to know what you're getting into. I have a suggestion. We have nothing to hide. When you're at the meetings, listen carefully to what the brothers are saying. Watch how we interact with one another. Take note of how the organization is financed.
This is one that I believe that Jake at Alt Worldly recently commented about, that when they mention things that are legitimate issues, it gives you a bit of solace to think that's actually not a problem, because they wouldn't be mentioning that one by name if it was a problem, right? So take note of how the organization is financed. Now, what he means there is that at the local congregation level, they will read out a monthly accounts report. That's it. That is the degree of financial transparency that is available. It's the amount received and expended at the local congregation level. So from local donations, local expenditures such as electricity and whatever, and the amount that they pass on to the branch. That is it. Beyond that point, or a similar announcement at an assembly hall at their assemblies and conventions, aside from that, there is no financial transparency at all. If you want to know about what total amount of the donations collected worldwide go towards anything, be it disaster relief or the cost of producing literature, or the amount that is spent on missionaries, or the amount that is spent or made from real estate. You have no way of knowing any of that information unless they happen to slip in a random tidbit, as they do occasionally, into a JW Broadcasting or something similar. Like recently, they put out a figure, I think it was like $12.5 million that they had spent in the previous service year or calendar year, I don't know, who cares, on disaster relief, which, just as a footnote to that, there's like 8 million members, so that's $1.50 each. I don't know what your average donations were when you were a witness, but I know that mine was much more than $1.50 a year, okay? So that is nothing out of the amount of resources that they have available, and there's a lot of reasons to be really skeptical about that figure. Lots of other channels have covered that. I won't get into it, but point being, the financial transparency that he is alluding to here is an illusion. It does not exist.
Get to know the elders, their wives. Introduce yourself to the circuit overseer and his wife when they come. Visit world headquarters of the branch. I'll come with you. I'll help you. And I want you to get really acquainted with the organization. And if you do, I'm sure you'll soon realize that what the people are saying about us isn't true.
This just flatly goes against common sense, plain common sense. Everyone wants to know what they're getting themselves into. Imagine that you were looking for a new accountant, and you'd gone for a meeting at the accounting firm, and they said something to you like this. Like, there's some negative press about us at the moment. Don't worry about that. That's all lies. You don't need to concern yourself with it. Don't look at it. Don't read it. Don't touch it. Stay away. It's poison. We're fine. Just get to know us. You know, we'll take you out for lunch. We'll discuss what options that we can provide for you and your business, and get to know us from us, and we'll look after you, and everything will be fine. No one would accept that in any other area of their life. Now, in this context, this is talking about somebody coming into the organization, which is fortunately happening a lot less these days. But for somebody already in the organization, this creates a unique little box of cognitive dissonance in which the individual, they're not necessarily stupid. There's a lot of really intelligent Jehovah's Witnesses, but they are stupid when it comes to this. They allow themselves to be treated like this. They allow themselves to be cut off from external information for the fear that that information might be spiritually poisonous or whatever. They would not accept this treatment in any other aspect of their life. They would not accept this treatment from their doctor, from their accountant, from their mechanic. But when it comes to their religious leaders, they accept this, and they think that it's perfectly fine and reasonable because they have been trained to think that way, and because of all of the other cognitive barriers that pop up in an immune defense response to having your mind changed when the stakes are so high. As soon as you wind out the stakes to infinite values, where your infinite life is at stake, where your family's eternal life is at stake, where all of your dead loved ones being there to greet them in a paradise earth is at stake, when everything is such high stakes, then your mind does not allow you to just engage with this like such a mundane thing as what you're having at a restaurant and is the kitchen clean, or is this accountant being dodgy with the books?
Well, maybe you can think of a better answer, but you get the idea.
Got the idea loud and clear there, David Splane.
Just a few drops of poison in a drink are enough to cause serious harm. And apostates often mix a few truths with lies.
Aye, mixing truths with lies. David Splane is about to give us a perfect example of this later in this very same talk. We'll actually skip ahead to that bit before coming back to some of the other insane things that he said.
Consider this. Now, you're working from door to door, and you meet a householder who says, "You Jehovah's Witnesses are terrible people. You let your children die. You don't accept medical treatment." Well, you ask the householder, "Do you know any of Jehovah's Witnesses personally?" "No." "Then where did you get the idea that we let our children die and don't accept medical treatment?" The householder says, "I have it on good authority. I read it in the newspaper."
As someone who's grown up a Jehovah's Witness, there are about 3 things that non-Jehovah's Witnesses know about Jehovah's Witnesses. Number 1, they don't celebrate birthdays and other holidays, which might be about to change soon based on the toasting thing. Who knows? Stay tuned. Number 2, they go door to door. Number 3, they don't accept blood transfusions. Even in this silly little example that David Splane has chosen to use, he has used witness language to obfuscate what the actual problem is. The householder would never say, "Oh, I've heard you don't accept medical treatment." No, that is witness language, to just put some generic term on what we all know that we should be talking about, right? The householder is going to be very direct, and they're going to say, "You don't accept blood transfusions. You let your children die rather than accepting a blood transfusion." And where would they get such an idea? From the newspaper, or perhaps from this month's broadcast, July 2025.
The doctors came in with some papers saying that the judge had given them permission to operate on me and give me a blood transfusion that very day. Because I was still a minor at the time, I found that my opinion and my decisions were being ignored. So at that moment, I realized that all of this wasn't against me, but against Jehovah. It became clear to me that everything was in his hands. While reviewing the legal order, it turned out that it contained an error. My last name is Canal, and they added an S to it. So they weren't able to use the document that ordered the transfusion that day. With time, I began to recover, and I started feeling reassured by the fact that I had not been judging Jehovah by asking where he was. Asking that question was a sign that I needed his help. My physical health is now the best it can be. And my spiritual condition with Jehovah, my friendship with him, has been greatly strengthened.
My, oh my, there is a lot to unpack there. I don't want to get too deep down the blood rabbit hole, but just really quickly, there are a lot of other videos which explain this very well and the issues with it. There's the Jensen letters back and forth from the branch, which are a really good deep dive into why this issue is so complicated. And realistically, what it boils down to is that there is no firm scriptural basis for this teaching at all. You could make the argument that the scripture which says to abstain from blood means a blood transfusion. You could make that argument, but you could easily make the argument that it absolutely does not mean that. Quick example would be Jesus healed on the Sabbath. He was breaking the law, but he justified it by saying that a life was worth more than the law. And that's a biblical principle. So anyway, all of that aside, this is a really horrible story. And I'm glad that this young man has survived and, you know, he's with his beautiful family. Great. That's fantastic. But getting back to the point here, which is about lying, mixing truths with lies. David Splane pretends like, "I don't know what you're talking about. Not letting minors have access to medical treatment? I've never heard of such a thing." This is known by anyone who knows anything about Jehovah's Witnesses. This is one of the top things that they know, that Jehovah's Witnesses do not accept blood transfusions. So it's just a stupid, asinine thing to say. And yet David Splane seems to think it's perfectly appropriate to use that as an example of being honest and not listening to falsehoods, not mixing truths with lies. All the while, the governing body has to know all of the serious doctrinal issues that they have, all of the things which underpin their worldview that they promote that are just not true. They have to know about them. They do know about them. They know about 607 not being the date that Jerusalem fell, for example. They know a lot of this stuff. It's been pointed out to them. They're not in the dark. Now, whether they actually genuinely are drinking their own Kool-Aid or not, I'm not sure. But they know that there are these fundamental issues. And when there's those fundamental issues with the belief system as a whole, how disgusting and irresponsible is it to impose such harsh, rigid, pharisaical rules on their members, such as this? And then just to gain some context around what this young man would have been thinking. I remember at the time when this happened, he was not legally an adult. So, you know, he might be in his late teens, but he's legally a child. And there's another unrelated experience in this month's broadcast of another man who had a medical condition. I believe his was cancer. And he says something which, this is the kind of thing that young boy who needed the blood transfusion would have been thinking about the situation. This is the kind of thing that is fed to the minds of Jehovah's Witnesses.
One thing I remember thinking was, well, when I open my eyes, I will either see the ceiling of the operating room or I'll see the new world.
And it's all good and well for you to take a stand for your faith. I respect that greatly. I have no problems with individual Jehovah's Witnesses. The stands that have been taken on the basis of faith are genuinely impressive from Jehovah's Witnesses and also from amongst other religions. But it should be an informed stand. It should not be a stand on something that is rules-based, made by a centralized governing body that can change their mind. They did this with regards to organ transplants. Organ transplants were considered cannibalism. And then shortly after, they flip-flopped on that position, and organ transplants were a conscience matter. It was okay now. Same with blood. Blood transfusions was a complete no-go. All blood was out. Then they changed that, and they allowed for blood fractions. That really complicated the doctrine for them greatly. And with the cultural shifts happening in the organization right now, I think that they would love to be able to move away from the blood doctrine. But they can't, because if they were to move away from it, they are admitting that they were wrong. And so many people have died. It's impossible to know how many, but it's got to be at least in the tens of thousands, probably more than that. And they are accountable for that if they admit that they're wrong. It is my hope, this is my little conspiracy theory on this, I think that if there is some medical advancement which really shakes up the blood world, maybe the use of artificial bloods, maybe something that just a discovery about blood, some major news. It doesn't even have to make sense. I mean, the rest of their doctrine doesn't. It just has to be big enough news in that space to act as a catalyzing force. I think that they could use that as an excuse, and it could give them the off-ramp that they're looking for, where they could say, in light of this, we no longer see the need to make a specific rule because there's so many different circumstances which could apply. Essentially the same Weasley logic that they used for announcing that cheersing was okay, toasting was fine, clinking glasses. Well, if they were to say that, it could be all pinned to whatever that discovery or breakthrough or whatever was in the field of blood. And then they would be able to do it without admitting any fault, and whilst actually making an effective change that would not continue to have this axe hanging over the head of anyone who needs medical treatment in amongst Jehovah's Witnesses. One last point about comparing this month's broadcast and that talk by David Splane is that I believe that that talk originally appeared at the end of one of the conventions. It's possibly also been featured on a broadcast, I don't know, but it could have easily been a part of a broadcast program, right? Or the experience involving blood could have easily been part of a convention program. But they deliberately don't put those two things together. And some of the most damning apostasy out there is simply a case of putting things back to back that the organization has produced, whether it is in written form or in video form or whatever. The Blue Envelope channel did a really good video a little while ago comparing the things that have been said on JW Broadcasting about different situations in which Jehovah has and has not answered prayers. And just by putting those clips back to back to back to back, it highlights the insanity of it. But what the organization gets away with a lot of the time is that they put things in whatever the order that they want, and the way that Jehovah's Witnesses are conditioned to receiving the information and to accepting things and to not questioning things, they never take it really out of order, and they never put it back to back with anything else to compare it. But this is such a glaring example because it doesn't even need to be back to back. As I said, non-witnesses, one of the top things that is known about Jehovah's Witnesses is their refusal of blood transfusions. But nonetheless, even though that is the case, it looks extra ridiculous to have an experience involving blood transfusions on the heels of a talk pretending to not know about what medical treatment the householder would have been referring to if they had used that language. All right, back to David Splane. Now, his last scriptural explanation, that was something. But this is something else.
Job chapter 12 and verse 11. This is Job speaking, and he says, "Does not the ear test out words as the tongue tastes food?" Does not the ear test out words? What does that mean? Does it mean that if we learn that apostates are going to be featured on a TV program, we should watch it to see if what they say is true? No. It basically means to consider the source of the words.
No, it doesn't. That's not what it means. I think it much more means like the first thing that you said. It means listening to something and evaluating it in the same way that the tongue tastes food and then tells you whether it's good or not, right? You determine based on the taste of the food whether you like it. Great. You listen to the words with your ear, and then you determine whether they're good. If you don't listen to them, then how will you know if they're good? And what has the ear got to do with the source of the words? In this context, he is talking about where this is coming from, whether it's written or a TV program or whatever. The ear may be able to tell you the direction that something is coming from, but clearly what it is talking about here in this context, when being compared to the tongue, is not the source of something. Because how would the tongue tell you the source of where something is coming from other than by tasting it? If you're making a comparison between the tongue and the ear, you are talking about the direct sensory input that thing is most involved with, taste and hearing.
Satan is behind the twisted teachings of apostates. He's the father of the lie. And those who lie are doing exactly what their father does. The apostates have nothing to offer us, brothers. All they have to offer is hate. All they have is, to offer is criticism and negative talk.
Oh yes, don't listen to those apostates. That's Satan talking. And all that apostates have to offer is criticism and negative talk. Look, when it comes to the doctrinal teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses, I guess to some degree that's true, but it doesn't come from a place of hatred. That part is an outright lie. Again, there's probably exceptions to the rule, but I don't hate you if you're watching this, especially if you're a physically and mentally in witness. I think it's amazing that you're here, and the thing that I do have to offer you is the truth. It's a hard pill to swallow, but the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, Jehovah's Witnesses, they do not have the truth. What they're selling is a pipe dream. And that was a bloody inconvenient truth for me to come to terms with, because I had lived my life with that dream in mind. When I woke up, I had to grieve everyone who had ever died. Everyone that I'd ever known, even people that I hadn't known. I mean, I was thinking I was going to get to meet Noah and the new system and all this stuff. I also had to grieve my own mortality and the mortality of everyone that I know. I don't know what's going on in this crazy world that we live in. I just don't. I don't have the answers. I'm not sure what they are. But similar to the banknote illustration that the society likes to use, how if you have the correct, if you know what the correct currency is, its defining features, you don't need to know all the details of the false currency. So you don't need to know everything about every false religion in order to be able to identify the true religion. Okay, great. In reverse of that, I do not need to know all the details, all the nuance of legal tender in order to be able to identify that an IOU written on the back of a fuel receipt is not legal tender. That's not legitimate money, okay? And that's in summary what's happened with me and Jehovah's Witnesses. So I don't have anything to offer you in the sense of what they have to offer you, but I do have the truth to offer you. And Jesus said, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And Jehovah's Witnesses, the leadership, they want to keep you in the organization for the sake of their own benefit. They are telling you lies disguised as truth. It might make you feel good. It might make you feel terrible to contemplate that it's not true. But personally, I think that is much better than wasting away years and years and decades more in this organization.
They believe the slanderous accusations of the apostates. Now, if they just take the time to check the facts, they'd see that they're being lied to, but they don't check the facts.
I would encourage you to check the facts. In fact, I am not the one discouraging you from checking the facts.
Here, you better look at this and see what you're getting into. Well, your student is concerned, and she wants you to take a look and tell her what you think. Well, that's not an option.
And take notice of the double standard. on the way into the organization or when hearing anything negative about the organization.
Well, that's not an option.
But on the flip side, if it's someone else examining their religious beliefs so as to disprove their deeply held beliefs that may have been passed down to them for generations, well, that's the only option. And simultaneously in this talk, David Splane is encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to do this.
When you hear something, check it out. Don't just circulate it, don't just believe it, check it out.
Almost reminds me of that verse in Job about how just as the tongue tests out food, the ear can test out words. And if you're going to have information that you might be, say, circulating, that has been called into question, wouldn't that be all the more reason to check it out if it might not be true? So as a Jehovah's Witness, part of that identity is actively witnessing. It's the preaching work. It's going and telling others. It's circulating information. So by all means, check it out. And then if you do check it out, and it turns out that the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses don't stack up, what is the logical next step? This is a thing that I think that a lot of PME witnesses don't understand about so-called apostates. I have been raised in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. I have essentially been raised as an activist. I have a set of information, a truth that I believe to be true, that I am taking out there to tell other people about it because it's important, right? That's the whole identity of being a Jehovah's Witness. So then when I find out that that is not true, I don't just discard all elements of my identity at once. I now am shifted in that motivation from sharing what I thought was true to what I now know to be true.